Okay, everybody, welcome back. This is Tak Oda, CIO of Attaché for Business, joined here with CEO Lesa Hammond. All right, I just thought we'd continue a conversation we started a little while ago. It was just the idea of KPIs. I don't want to go into KPIs specifically, but I remember we started talking about the shift in culture and work style and management style that has to happen with remote working. And now we're actually even a few more months into this than when we originally had our conversation. So I thought it might be high time to discuss a little bit about maybe best practices, policies that companies might want to start using to allow more remote work and make it more of a thing, right? It's not just a temporary measure anymore.
Yeah, it's funny when this whole pandemic started, people kept talking about the new normal, and I kept thinking, this isn't the new normal. This is a temporary situation, but this is really becoming the new normal. It's kind of crazy.
Exactly.
And one of the things that's interesting is in doing studies, a lot of people are saying that they're going to be keeping people telecommuting or remote work for much longer than they had originally planned. And some plan on not bringing people back. They've actually realized the benefits of remote work, and it's working for them. But there's still a number that have said that they don't really know how to work with the employees that are remote, and they aren't sure what they're doing and things like that. So that's where we had that KPI discussion a bit a while ago. But a lot of companies developed telecommuting policies years ago, and they were usually for, a few employees in situations where people had to telecommute, things like that. It wasn't like this is the norm and this is what we're going to be doing. So one thing that we could talk about is how those policies now need to be revised if you have one, and if you don't have one, then what you want to include in it.
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So now people may have had these policies before, but now we have to take into account that everybody's doing it, right? It's not just how do you manage this odd person here who has to work from home. It's everyone.
Right.
Great. Yeah, I'm just curious to know, do you feel like there are specific industries that are having an easier time with this than others?
Yeah, well, certainly industries that people work from a desk and generally don't have to be out in the field or don't have a lot of customers coming in to meet them are the ones where, and if it's industry or if it's even jobs, like for example, there are companies that have people coming in, but then behind the scenes, there are a lot of people who never interact with the customer at all. Right. So those types of jobs are the ones that are most suited for the telecommuting. But one of the things that COVID's done is it's made it so that the jobs where people were coming in, where there were customers coming into a site, they're no longer coming into the site. So they've learned how to deal with customers, not in a physical space like they used to.
Interesting. Right. Okay. So yeah, it's not just a shift in the work culture, but a shift in the client culture as well.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah. Right. That changes everything.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, let's loop back. Tell me more.
Okay. So what we just talked about is one of the big things is, what positions are suitable for this remote work. And you can have both. So, looking at it, when we think about exempt and non-exempt, and I probably should talk a little bit about what those are because I know people get them confused a lot. So exempt positions are exempt from the labor code and overtime. So these are the people who don't receive overtime. It's kind of counterintuitive because they're exempt from overtime. And then the non-exempt are the people who get overtime if they work, depending on what state you're in, if they work more than 8 hours or if they work more than 40 hours a week or whatever the state regulations are. So thinking about that, you could have both of those could be telecommute positions, but you have to be careful when the telecommute position or the remote work position is a non-exempt position, because you want to make sure that they're counting their hours, they're counting them correctly, you're not overworking them, and that you have everything set up so that they're the ones reporting their hours, and they're reporting them, and you aren't saying things like, well, just put, you worked from 8 to 5.
Right.
You want them to actually count the hours they work, take their lunch, don't count the hours they don't work, that kind of thing. So that's number one. Thinking about the positions that are suitable, though, it's kind of like we talked about, the ones that don't have a lot of customer interaction, face-to-face customer interaction. So, for example, if you're working at a clothing store and you're a clerk, you're not going to be able to do it remote. A bank, bank tellers may not be able to do remote, but some of the other bank employees might be able to. So a lot of it is explaining to people why they're in the position they're in and why they can't work remotely versus other people who can, and making that very clear.
Okay, so there's one aspect of it, which is whether or not somebody actually needs to be there, right? It's just the nature of their job. But it also seems like you're implying that there's a difference between, and you didn't say this outright, but there's this implicit difference between exempt and non-exempt as well, just because there's the added load of having to track hours for non-exempt employees.
Right.
And I think just hearkening back to a previous conversation about KPIs and the shift towards more task-oriented review of people's performance, that it seems like exempt people would be easier to track in that way. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. And I guess the other piece of that is that when you have employees working remotely and you have non-exempt employees working remotely, it is hour for hour, whereas with exempt employees, if they work any part of a day, they get paid for that day. So, unless you've got some other arrangement with them, like, you're working where they actually say, I'm going to work 2 hours this day, 4 hours this day, then you're basically putting them in a non-exempt position. But that has to be clearly specified when you're doing it.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, the whole exempt, non-exempt, and how working with them and furloughing them becomes a very specific thing too. I'm actually thinking maybe this conversation should be about that instead of.
Well, let's save that for next week.
Which one? The furlough and all the, okay.
Yeah. That sounds like its own conversation.
It is. I mean, the whole thing of employees in terms of exempt, non-exempt, what you can do with which ones. It's
no, that could
conversation.
Yeah, that's a pretty deep conversation. So then let's come back to the thing about policies for telecommuting. Do you want to just summarize what you think the takeaway should be for people here?
Yeah, so if you're developing a policy for remote work, you want to identify, which positions can be, which is how we got off on this discussion, which positions can be, are part of that policy, which positions can be remote and which ones can't. And you probably want to describe why in the policy so that people aren't wondering, well, why can't this be a remote position? You also want to discuss, it's what positions and who's eligible. So sometimes there are eligibility requirements, like you might want somebody to work in a location for the first 3 to 6 months of their job so that they get the training they need. So you want to talk about that kind of eligibility too.
There also seems to be like a time that you want to set to figure out. I feel like there's an element of deciding if you trust the person to work from home as well.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's almost hard to know until there are people that you obviously will know. This person can't work at home because they can't work at work.
That's a whole other question. Yeah.
Exactly. But there are going to be people that it's going to be hard to know if they can really work well from home until they start working from home.
Gotcha. All right. That's fair.
And then you want to also look at what requirements are there in the home if they're going to work from home? So, you know, and you can set those requirements. Like, do you have a space where you can be away from, you know, family, pets, etc.?
Mhm.
Is that one of the requirements that you have? And you may not have that as a requirement, but if you do, you want to be explicit about it and make sure that you have it for everyone. Because the worst thing you can do is end up, you know, writing somebody up or telling somebody they can't work from home anymore because their dog barks too much. But then another employee has a dog barking in the background periodically, and you haven't said anything to that employee. So you want to be consistent, and you want to have those kind of things in your policy. What kind of equipment they need and what kind of equipment you'll provide.
Mhm.
So, you know, are you providing a computer for them? Are you providing their internet for them? Or are you giving them a stipend to do it on their own? So you want to think through those kind of things.
Mhm. And make it equitable, of course, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And then what kind of safeguards you have are required or that you have. What are the security systems? What kind of requirements do you have for them? Like, do they need to close their computer down and log out of the system every night at a certain time, or just period? You know,
Right.
like you don't want their VPN on running forever
Exactly.
connected to your
Yeah.
company.
Right. Wow. I asked you to summarize, and there's still quite a bit that you just listed here. So there's a lot. So I think maybe I'll stop you here before we
Okay.
overwhelm everybody. But yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's security. There's whether the person's set up to work. There's whether or not the job is suited for that. There's a number of things to keep in
What
mind.
technology you're going to give them versus, you know, what they need to have, those kind of things.
Right. But I think if there's one takeaway from this is like, don't just jump into it. Think it through. We realize that for the last few months, people have been flying by the seat of their pants. Sure, that's just normal. But as you evolve through this, people need to put some thought into it. That's the essential takeaway, right?
That's a great takeaway. Absolutely.
All right, great. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you, Lesa, as usual.